Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the very last Art in Focus of Fall 2024. My name is Michelle DeMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement here at the Fairfield University Art Museum. Today, speaking to you from the splendors of our classroom because classes have ended and there is no class meeting in here during our allotted time, so I don't have to kick the director out of her office to record or stream this instead. Our focus object today is another object from the exhibition Ink and Time, European prints from the Wetmore Collection. So if you've seen other art and focus events in the last couple of months, we have seen Durer and we have seen Rembrandt. We have talked about Raphael and Marcantonio Raimondi. And I said to someone, it's not that we necessarily save the best for last, but we certainly save the shiniest for last. So if you are in the area, you do have until December 21st to come and see the show. And the prints that we have looked at so far this semester have all been in the main gallery space in the Bellarmine Hall galleries. But today we will step gently through the archway to look at the print that this lady with the black sweatshirt is standing right in front of, that is in the smaller adjacent gallery through this arch. And it is this one, Maria Katharina Prestel after Jacopo Ligozzi, The Triumph of Truth over Envy from 1780, which has this wonderfully long medium list of etching and aquatint in brown and ochre ink touched with gold leaf. So to answer what might be an immediate question, if you're wondering, is that gold? The answer is yes. And that alone was what drew the museum director and me to this print when we were just looking through all of the wonders that Connecticut College has in their Wetmore collection. I think I might have mentioned in past Art in Focus events that we were really interested to see if we could inject any notes of color into what is a largely black and white show. Especially early woodcuts and engravings were very commonly hand painted after the fact. The Wetmore collection only had one that we borrowed and put into the exhibition. But who's going to say no to a little bit of gold like this one? If this is the first time you're watching an Art in Focus event, please remember that you are more than welcome to send in any questions or comments or observations as we chat. And I sort of fill in with what we discussed a little while ago with the group who came and sat with me in what is a fairly small back gallery. So the first thing that we talked about in the gallery together was the marked difference between the viewing experience of where we were, and I'm going to go back to this picture. So we were just seated on stools in the back gallery. The light looks fairly bright, but that's a little bit of an illusion of the photograph. The lights are as dim in the back gallery as they are in the main gallery to account for the fact that these works on paper have to have relatively low light levels. I think 8-foot candles, if you are familiar with the how light levels are monitored and measured. So it was interesting to be sitting right in front of the object, and two of the people in the group said, I really can't see anything. We said, well, what's going on here? That's always the first place we start. And I said, I have no idea. So there we are in front of the art object, and like a terrible art historian, I was using my iPad to go through the same slideshow that I have here. And we agreed that in a lot of ways, it was easier for us to make out some of these fine details with a backlit image on an iPad screen, even though we had the work of art right in front of us on the wall. And part of that just has to do with light conditions. Again, a backlit image is easier for your eye to see. And also the photograph of this print that you are seeing on my slideshow through the digital projection over the waves of the internet, that was photographed by our photographer, Paul Mutino, and he was able to have light in the space when he's photographing. So it's just a little reminder of all of the slight variations that we can encounter when viewing an art object. And when I said before, a bad art historian, when I'm talking to students, we always emphasize, we want you to go to a museum, we want you to stand in front of that sculpture or that painting and really get a sense of it as a physical object. But sometimes you also have to grapple with, okay, well, the physical experience is not one that everyone is finding easy. Are there technological ways we can fill a bit of that gap? So the images that we were going through as a group on my iPad, we just started at the top of the print and we looked at this very blown up image of the top third and asking you all what I was asking that group, what do we see that is actually happening and going on here? So we have this female figure who we can clearly see is unclothed on the top. You can see that she has sort of a loop going over to the bottom half of her draped garment, but that leaves her breasts exposed. Her left arm is raised and sort of clenched. And someone remarked that at first glance, I'll go back here, at first glance, there might be an assumption that she's holding a weapon, because that certainly seems like the pose we would expect to find is, if not a sword, at least is there a rock or something clenched in her fist. But on close inspection, her hand looks pretty empty to me. But we see a lot of effort to depict her upraised, the musculature of her upraised arm, her downcast gaze as she's looking at this person below her. And that person, and here just focusing in on the central part of the print where, let's say, the action is taking place, he certainly has a lot of muscles, especially if you look at his legs. He is straining all of those quadricep muscles and probably adding in a few that don't look like they're 100% natural. And he's in this very interesting position of, he seems to be on his knees, bent over. And we spent a little bit of time trying to understand how these two figures are interacting with each other. And one of our guests, Joe, jumped in and said, well, kind of looks like she's riding him. I'm like, well, I can see that. Someone else commented when we were in the group, we were talking about what we might think the subject is before you get that quick glimpse at what the title is on the caption. And someone pointed out that this immediately put her in mind of images of the sacrifice of Isaac. And it's all about the body positions, right? You often see depictions of Isaac on his knees, sometimes with his father grabbing his hair to hold it back and raising a knife overhead before the angel swoops in. No angel here, no knife, but she does have a grip on this guy's hair. They also pointed out, although it is a little bit ambiguous, if we try to understand where her legs are, you can kind of get the impression that she's got her left knee underneath the upraised arm. She's got her left knee digging into this guy's back, making sense why he is bent over. But then try to follow her right leg that's on the left side of the piece. Follow it down, and she, in the most strange way, has her toes on his outstretched right hand. So she's half on, half off. But I joked that those are some prehensile toes. She's got some double jointed toes that she's able to sort of grip onto his hand over there at the right. But it definitely gives you a sense that these two people are very much entangled. One of our guests, Joanne, had observed that the cloak or the garment that's flowing off her back around this upraised arm, it increases her size, which is really kind of interesting considering that the guy on the bottom is clearly a muscular and well-developed guy. And here we have this woman who seems to be, keeping him down with ease. And it appeared that flowing drapery is sort of a visual way of increasing her sense of dominance on the top half of the composition. And of course, it adds to the sense that this is happening in a moment. There's wind that must be passing through that's rippling her cloak in one direction. And then look at how all of his hair is flying in the opposite direction. She's got her hand around some of it, but the rest of it is these curls that's flying off toward the left side of the composition. And then we go down to the bottom of the print and we see that there is a creature, which there was some discussion over. Is this really a serpent? Is that a dog? Is it some sort of chimera, a dog-faced snake? But I think there is an implication of a serpent, not least because of the coils that we can see that are wrapped around both of the kneeling figure's calves. And we also are aware, once we've gotten to the bottom of this, that this is not taking place, for example, on a hillside, like we might see the sacrifice of Isaac scene, but on a bed of clouds. So if we had any doubt before that this is some sort of mythological, allegorical, something that isn't real actors in real space, I think seeing them floating along on their little bed of clouds would absolutely clue you in. What remains to wonder, though, oops, I'm going to go backwards to what is the triumph of truth over envy? And we did spend some time puzzling out together in the gallery what makes this woman, if we assume the woman who's standing, who does appear to be the one who has the literal and figurative upper hand in this interaction, if she's truth, what do you think makes her truth? And we didn't come to any kind of agreement in the gallery. So if you have thoughts on what would set her up to be the figure of truth over envy, let me know. In terms of why the figure on the bottom might be envy, there I would guess that the inclusion of this serpent figure might be a hint as to his envious nature. I can certainly think of other iconographic precedents. If you're familiar with Bronzino's allegory painting, there's sort of a half snake, half girl figure of deceit, and a figure of envy is also included. Probably mixing those two up as I'm imagining it, but I can make snakes and envy work. Or as a member of our group said, as soon as we went down on the iPad looking at the snake, they said, oh, snake, the devil, it's bad. We have certain associations with snakes and serpents, especially in the Western world, that are very hard to shake. But I had just proposed to them, like, well, what if the snake were truth? Could there be a way that that would work? And we agreed it wouldn't. So maybe you can find a way to think about how it would make it work. But that is the fun of allegorical depictions, right? Usually there is something that is going to clue us in to the identity of these people. But I pointed out that this particular print, you will find it categorized in different museums under slightly different titles. I don't think there's a uniformly accepted depiction or description of what it is. We chose for our show to follow what the National Gallery of Art in DC, how they had described the print when they exhibited it as part of a big show on aquatint in 2021, which is a fantastic catalog if it's accessible to you in a library. And before moving on, I want to point out something I realized I didn't mention when we were together in person in the gallery. The wonderful effect that that very diaphanous gown has on still depicting all of the aspects of the woman's body. The fact that you can see her stomach, you can see where it tucks in between her legs, which would make sense, again, if she's got one knee pressing this guy down and then one off to the side. There's a lot of effort to really show the interaction there of the drapery and whatever divine or allegorical wind is blowing us around. Now, those who have heard me talk about prints from the Ink and Time exhibition before will know that I'd mentioned one of my interests when I was working on the texts that are in the gallery and for other public events. I realized I found it really interesting to pay attention to all the little bits of inscriptions that are around the margins, typically, of these prints, which often will tell you that more than one person was involved in its production. And it reminds us that the multiple people who were involved often wanted their contributions to be recognized. Or if they were reproducing the work of a famous artist, they wanted their role and the famous artist's celebrity to be noted. And here, certainly, I had known that it is virtually impossible in the gallery to really make out these inscriptions on the print. But here we have them, little details blown up. You see in the upper image, which is the lower left-hand corner, Ligozzi, D-E-L, shorthand for delineavit, or Ligozzi drew this, cluing us in that this is a reproductive print made after another artist's work. And then at the lower right, we see J.T. Prestel sculpts it, or the SC with a colon after it. Sculpts it for engraved or etched this. So we have printmaker, we have the artist who created the original work. That kind of seems to set us up for, we've got a lot of information. As so often happens though, is like the information is there, but we also have to, what's the phrase, trust but verify. Because in the case of this particular print, that would be deceptive. It's not, in fact, Johann Prestel who is the person who actually created this aquatint. It's his wife. I found this just this morning and it made me laugh, so I knew I had to put this into this slideshow. Here is Johann Gottlieb Prestel doing a pastel portrait of his wife, Maria Katharina, in 1780. This is in a museum in Frankfurt. So this portrait was made in the very same year as the print we're talking about. Please do not ask me any questions about how much hair she has or how much of it is tucked under that marvelous cap, because it's certainly a lot. Oops. I'll go backward here for a second. If you look at different museums that have impressions of this particular print, you will find that a number of them today catalog it under the name Maria Katharina Prestel first. There are some museums that still have it listed under her husband, but within the last 10 years or so, something art historians have learned as there's been more research about this artist is that she was a pupil and then later the wife of a well-known etcher and aquatint artist based in Nuremberg in Germany. So she wanted to become a printmaker. She apprenticed with Prestel and later married him. Theirs was not a happy union. It involved a bankruptcy. It ended in divorce. Nonetheless, she had his last name, and when she worked for him in his studio, when she would produce aquatints and etchings, when they went out under the studio's brand name, effectively, which was that of her husband. But more recently, scholars have started to pick apart which are the prints that were created by Johann Prestel, which are the prints that were created by Maria Katharina, and catalog them appropriately. I'm going to go back one more time to this slide, which tells us the way this print was made. So this etching and aquatint in brown and ochre ink touched with gold leaf. This is a wonderfully dramatic print. I'm going to show you in a moment the drawing by Ligozzi after which it was based. But the way that Maria Katharina and her husband sort of made their fame and fortune was they were masterful artists of aquatint. Aquatint it's always associated with etching. It's an offshoot of the etching process. We, in our last Art in Focus, had talked about Rembrandt, where Rembrandt might have been experimenting in the 17th century with something called a sulfur bite, literally flicking just a tiny little bit of acid onto his plate just to get sort of an irregular pitted surface that might hold ink differently and make it a little bit more tonal. Rembrandt did not have access to aquatint, but by the end of the 17th century, and certainly by the time the Prestels are working, aquatint is available to artists as a technique which, while very complicated, will allow them to really reproduce painterly effects. Now, if I say painterly, looking at this particular print, if you look at, for example, the effect of the multiple gradations of shadow in the clouds at the upper left, if you look at the sort of almost brushstroke looking shadows behind her cloak at the right, that's what we mean by painterly. Something that would be harder to do just with the etched line alone. So when we look closely at the figures, we see the black line of traditional etching, but we also see all of these other effects. And aquatint, I'm going to say right now, is a complicated technique that I'm going to do my best to sum up for you. Please feel free, if you are an artist who has experience with aquatint, to feel free to correct me in any which way. I did a workshop in Minneapolis at a printmaking studio a couple of summers ago. They showed us how aquatint works today in contemporary studios, and we did a little bit of it ourselves. But it requires a lot of advanced planning. There's no going back in aquatint. You are working toward darker tones progressively, and at each step, you have to block out, protect with ground, anything that you don't want getting darker and darker. So there's a lot of advanced, more so than regular etching has to go into it. But aquatint relies on the use of something called rosin, which is a form of ground. Apparently it's fairly toxic, which is explained to me why most university printmaking studios don't usually include aquatint, because there's lots of extra OSHA related requirements that go along with it. In a contemporary printmaking studio, they might have something they call their aquatint box. And it has a fan and sort of a tray with ground up pieces of rosin lying in it of different particulate sizes. You flip a switch, because of course we're in 2024, not in 1780, and a fan turns on just for a second and poofs all of these little particles into the air in the box. And then you wait a few seconds, knowing the larger particles will drop to the bottom faster. And then you open the door and you stick your prepared etching plate in. You want to catch, like falling snowflakes, some of those particles that are coming down. And once you've gathered them on your plate, and they will fall in a relatively random way, you would take that out and you would warm the plate so those rosin particles would sort of fuse onto it. And what you've wound up with is sort of an irregular, pockmarked area where all of those little dots of rosin are themselves a bit of ground. Acid will not affect those areas. All of the areas where a particle didn't fall, though, still open game for the acid to come in and etch in those areas. And artists realized what this was going to do, as opposed to digging in a line through the ground, opening up sort of that hole for the acid to affect it, through almost this random snowfall-like effect, you could come up with this canvas that would create a much more softer, much more painterly way that the acid would etch depth into your plate. There's so much more that goes into how aquatint works. Again, I am not a printmaker. I'm not a print historian by trade either. I'm just going to throw that out there. But just in terms of what aquatint meant in the history of printmaking, it's huge. Because if you are, as the Prestels are, if you're a reproductive printmaker, meaning you're not someone like Rembrandt who's coming up with compositions out of your mind, but rather you have made a very successful trade into going into the collections of the wealthy and reproducing, let's say, drawings by Italian Renaissance and Baroque artists, things that are unique objects, and you can turn it into a print and publish that in an album that others would want to buy and turn into little paper museums of their own, you are going to have to reproduce effects of things like wash, watercolor, things that are not so linear, that are, again, much more painterly. Aquatint can help you get those effects. And as I mentioned, the Prestels were really well known for being able to do this well, even though their partnership did not end in a positive manner. This is what they are reproducing. This belonged to a German collector at the time. Today it is in the Albertina in Vienna. The Triumph of Truth Over Envy. The drawing itself was created sometime before 1627. There's no date listed on the Albertina's website, but 1627 is the year Ligozzi died. So we know it must have been created before then. So there's a considerable span of time between when this is created and when the Prestels are reproducing it in a German collector's cabinet. We might notice some obvious similarities between the print that the Prestels produced and the work that they are imitating. And one is based just on the color of the paper. So the reason that Prestel is using a brown tone paper and then using brown and ochre ink to reproduce the print, they are going for the same color effects as in the original object. And this is the only print on toned paper in our exhibition, but certainly you can see many other examples of, for example, blue toned paper, other toned papers that artists might use depending on how it might suit their purpose. You might be able to make out behind the woman some faint areas of gold that are indeed present on the original drawing itself. But if we put it opposite the Prestel's work, you might notice that Maria Katharina went a little hard with the gold, I would say. And it's hard to know whether that was a choice made because, on the one hand, was there more gold leaf still adhering to the Ligozzi drawing when she saw it in 1780 than there is today? That seems to me to be one possibility relevant to conservation. Or was there a sense that perhaps Ligozzi's drawing had once had more gold and she was trying to recapture an imagined original appearance? Or did they just think that it would really pop if they went for that that gold added onto the surface of the print? Either way, that is certainly more striking, I would say, the amount of gold that is on the printed version. Of course, it's a reverse image because all printmaking results in some kind of a mirror. And it is no surprise to find that there are many ways in which the power of the figures is more clearly rendered in Ligozzi's original. There's a softness to the face of the woman, for example. The flow of the muscles I find to be much more legible in the original pen, ink, and wash drawings as opposed to its reproduced image. But the overall visual impact is there. And as we see the wash effect of what Ligozzi would have been doing, wash just means we have ink, we add a little bit of water to make it viscous, and then you're sort of adding shadow with this inky substance. And Maria Katharina is able, through aquatint, to reproduce that. She's made it a little bit, I think, more of a dramatic contrast of light and shadow than in the original, but she's absolutely capturing the original appearance, or overall appearance, I would say. And we had a comment from H who said, well, with that information, is this a sort of bio for Maria Katharina as the female, truth, and triumphing, and her husband, who is credited with this work as envy? Makes so much sense now, the composition. Well, I like that you're taking Maria Katharina aside. I haven't even gotten to the rest of their life story, but perhaps, however, I would say when they produce this, they are a husband and wife team. What their marital situation was like in the original moment, I don't know. Tom adds, woman represents truth. Jesus said to Pilate, I am truth, to which Pilate said, what is truth? The man is envy. The devils exist because Lucifer and other angels refuse to serve humans per God's salvation plan, due to the envy of mankind who are made in God's image. One of the awesome things about all forms of art, but especially something that is allegorical, is where it can take us in terms of connections, things it makes us think of. I mentioned that someone who was with me in the in-person group immediately went to another Old Testament story, the sacrifice of Isaac, just based on the body positions, the way we associate the serpent, maybe to the story of Adam and Eve, for example. There's so much room for that sort of openness of interpretation, in no small part because, as I mentioned, there aren't really a lot of other symbols here to require us to interpret it in one particular way or another. But since H had commented on this potentially being biographical, I will add that this was created in the year 1780. I can go back to the lovely portrait. There she is, Maria Katharina. This is made in the same year. 6 years after this was made, there was a bankruptcy that disrupted their partnership. But in 1786, Maria Katharina Prestel divorced her husband. They had a child together. She took her child and left Germany forever, and she moved to London, where she became a very successful aquatint artist in her own right, which I find very interesting because this is an installation shot of that hallway again. Maria Katharina's print is at the right. It's hung in the gallery next to our only other work in this show by a female artist. That's Angelica Kaufman's Girl Reading. And I might have mentioned, well, I know I've mentioned certainly in person, that when I was putting the show together with my students, one of the first questions they asked me was, well, how many women artists are we going to be able to put in the show? And the answer I had to give them was, well, not many, but it's not because women weren't printmakers in this time period. It's just the question of which of those prints found their way into Fanny Wetmore's collection that we were then borrowing from. But in fact, printmaking by Maria Katharina's time, it was an area where it was a little bit easier for women to break into or to pursue than, let's say, making sculpture or making painting, especially etching because it was tied closely to drawing, which was something that well-educated ladies were always taught to do. Now, aquatint, again, is a step much above in terms of complexity, in terms of the chemicals you're using. So I think Maria Katharina was perhaps maybe one of the best known women aquatinters, if that's a word we can use. We say etchers, why not aquatinters of her time? But she set herself up in London and had a pretty successful career working on her own. She became really well known for reproducing landscape paintings through aquatint. And I mention her also in conjunction with Angelica Kaufman, who also designed that print when she was living in London, because they both worked with the same individual. So one of the people who hired Maria Katharina Prestel in London, his name was John Boydell. He was a publisher. And he was also the publisher of the Angelica Kaufman print that is hanging next to her on the wall. And then just continuing the associations, we have a print designed by Boydell himself to the left of Girl Reading, and another one that he had overseen the production of as a publisher hanging beyond that. So it's just a reminder of the sort of web of interconnectedness that existed, not only among artists, but among the whole printmaking ecosystem. There was room for a lot of people to participate. And the fact that we don't see more women artists on the walls in the show in no way means that there were not many more women artists who were participating. Of course, Angelica Kaufman, I should mention, is well known for having made her name not only as a printmaker, but really as a painter. And as a painter who made her mark in what had been traditionally considered a man's genre, and that is history painting, large format history paintings. She was one of the founders of the Royal Academy in London. So she had made it work in multiple areas of art. Maria Katharina Prestel stayed in printmaking, which is where she had trained originally. Oh, and I had forgotten that I had included a close-up of the Angelica Kaufman Girl Reading. In this case, again, my interest in the inscriptions on the bottoms of the print. At the lower right, it is telling you in sort of abbreviated form that Angelica Kaufman, that she carved this when she was in London in 1770. And at the lower left, it's harder to read, but it says John Boydell, J. Boydell, and excuted for published in 1781. So what's interesting is that for some reason, John Boydell did not publish a print off this plate for 11 years after Angelica Kaufman had created it. And by that time, she had actually left London and was living happily in Italy for the rest of her life. But bringing us back to the end, the close, almost the close of this wonderful exhibition, Ink and Time, We've come from starting looking in the art and focus events of this season at Albrecht Dürer in 15th, 16th century Germany. And here we are in Germany again, several centuries in the future, with this very dramatic and very evocative moment. Now, as someone commented, you could take this as a biographical commentary. We could think of this as, the triumph of something good over something negative. I said to the folks who joined me in the gallery, is like, this is the energy you want to take with you into the holiday period, right? Someone's gossiping about you, don't take it. It's truth over envy. But of course, as we mentioned, an allegorical depiction is wonderful in that it can lead our minds in so many wonderful different ways. If you have any final observations or questions about this wonderful print, feel free to put them into the box. I will just take the time to mention again that the Ink and Time European prints from the Wetmore Collection is on view at Fairfield University in the Bellarmine Hall Galleries through Saturday, December 21st. We are open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 to 4. We are also open until 8 p.m. every Thursday. So in fact, tonight we're going to be having an art party. So if you're in the area, want to stop by the galleries, tonight would be a great night. Make some relaxing artwork in the classrooms, stroll down and take a look at the artworks that are in the gallery. And we will look forward to welcoming you to a new series of Art and Focus events in the spring. I wish everyone a happy holiday season and a relaxing new year. Take care.